Welcome this morning. Glad to see you this morning and glad that you're here with us. I'm grateful to be just present with you and preaching this morning, teaching God's Word. And so that's a joy of my life and a passion of mine, and it has been for many years now. I'm 43 and gave my life to Christ when I was 5, I was picked up by a church bus when I was 5, and I rode for a couple of years there. One of those old school Baptist churches who used to run bus ministries, and so, they go into those low-income neighborhoods and pick up kids. I would go for a lollipop, and my mom would send me for some free time. So it worked out. I guess it was a win-win for everyone. But anyway, came to faith at 7. But between the age of 5 and 7, had this sense that I wanted to be a pastor, and so I think I've explored why I may have come to that and why I've pursued that my whole life. But the church had always been a place of affirmation for me, even as a kid. It was a place where I felt welcomed. It was a place where people pat you on the head, pat you on the back, and give you big hugs. And so you go to Sunday school as a 5 to 7-year-old and experience that kind of warmth, that kind of reception, and you think, I want to live here. What is this building called, and where is this? As a kid, you may not realize that those people don't live there. They're just volunteering in children's ministry that Sunday. But that says a lot, though, about volunteering in children's ministry. It's a huge setup to get you guys to sign up to serve for children's ministry. And I'm just kidding. That didn't go over as... Okay, now we're laughing. So, but seriously, though, the opportunity to serve in children's ministry is a big deal. It's how I came to faith. And so I came to faith and gave my life to Christ early and began to serve him. And throughout that time, growing up, whatever, just felt an overwhelming affirmation and then, affection. But then also in the body of Christ, I found a lot of affirmation. You're going to do great things, and man, God's really going to use you, and you're a wonderful young man, and we're just so encouraged by you and all that kind of stuff. And so I've received through the church in those early years a lot of affection and affirmation, and those kinds of things led me pretty early, maybe around 12 years old, to have the sense, the sort of even further sense, the confidence that God had called me to pastor or to preach and teach, and so had been pursuing that as well. And so that affirmation and even affection in the church really continued from that early age all the way up until when we church planted. Again, no laughs. All right, that's great. And so then at that point, all the affection and affirmation, was kind of like, well, you could do this a little better, and you could maybe tweak these couple of things. And we come from this church. We've been there for 30 years, and we loved the way they did that. We just didn't like that one last decision they made, so we left. And we hope you, church, will be the same as our last church, but maybe with a couple of improvements. And so that kind of was sort of the vibe, for church planting. And the reason I say that is because the church has always been a source of great joy for me, even as I joke about some of the expectations we have when we go to a church or when people come to a church. Even though I am kidding, I think it's good for us to actually evaluate, wait a second, the men and the women in many cases, but particularly the men who pastor churches in, our church, Kris and whoever's next and all that kind of stuff. These people who minister in churches likely have been preparing their entire lives for something like this. And so they've dedicated time and energy and hours to something like this. And even if they get something wrong or get a decision wrong or even miss an email or a text or something like that, I think it's worth at least just recognizing what it takes to become a pastor, but even recognizing just the passion and desire that someone would have to pastor anyways, which is huge for us. So that's why I wanted you guys to read this book, Pastors Are People Too. Now, this is the real setup. I was kidding about children's ministry, and I was kidding about not receiving any affirmation in church planting. That's actually not true at all. But this is actually something I do want you to do. I want you to read this book. It will make a huge difference to me if a few months from now you have maybe a few things you'd like to share or say, or a few things that you feel like aren't going your way. For me to know that you've read this book and you're grounded in the gospel, and what you're bringing by way of conversation is really rooted in what you think would be the best for the church, and maybe even the best for your community of faith, and maybe even the best for the pastor and those kinds of things. So I really want you to read this book. I won't say that if you haven't read this book, I won't have a conversation with you. I wouldn't go that far. Well, I'm pretty close. And anyways, if you have conversations about the church and about the transition and everything else we're going through, which I have an update for you, then I would want you to speak to the church team and the elders, the other two that we have as well. Anyway, so I'd want you to talk to them and really begin to build a relationship with them and ask them any questions that you have. So the door is always open for that kind of feedback. But I'm going to make a heavy push that you read this book, Pastors Are People Too. So if you haven't done that, grab a copy. We have a few copies left, and if we run out of copies, we'll buy a few more. We're giving them away, one per family, and I'd love for you to get a chance to read that. All right, there's another reason why I say that, though. So this is kind of unrelated. It's not really related to me necessarily in terms of why I'm transitioning out of the lead pastor role and why we're looking for a new lead pastor to replace us and all that. But I want to say this, though, because I think it's good for us as a church to realize it. Sometime, I guess it would have been, let's go all the way back to 2020 with COVID and some of the effects that happened in COVID. So at 2020 or so, I would say that year from about March, through the middle of the summer, through the end of that year, I'd spoke to quite a number of my friends who own businesses and run businesses. And I think that a lot of businesses, including the church even, had some initial effect from COVID because we couldn't meet. Remember that? We couldn't meet at all. And then other businesses were in other kinds of trouble, other kinds of hardships were facing those businesses. But even though we as a church couldn't meet, we continued to see high level of engagement and even a high level of giving, and we even sort of rallied to serve. We went to the Catholic High, and we did quite a number of things. So where a lot of my counterparts who maybe run businesses, when I say counterpart, I just mean, I'm supposed to be responsible for the church. They're responsible for their businesses. They experienced a lot of the setbacks maybe in 2020, first quarter 2021, something like that. The church and our church and many other churches that I am in relationship with, the other pastors and all, didn't experience quite the same impact. It was a bit more delayed. It was about like a year later. So I would say maybe 2021 going into first quarter 2022 were really tough on Anchor Church and quite a number of other churches that I know. So it was a bit of a delayed effect on the church. And so I think the reason I'm saying that is because I want to mirror that with what was known about, I would say maybe a year and a half ago. Do you guys remember the term that was coined, I think, the Great Resignation? You guys familiar with that? Quite a number of people switching careers, switching jobs, stepping down, moving on, doing other things. Well, even though a year and a half ago or so, I began to really think through what God was calling me to do, in the middle of COVID, didn't make any sense at all to make a transition. And I didn't feel the way I think, and I still don't feel the way I think many feel with this great resignation. I don't like my job anymore, and I don't want to do this, and nobody appreciates me in the office anymore, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a number of those kind of things that kind of rattle around when you listen for the stories of the great resignation. Well, that was maybe a year and a half ago. And I would say what you're seeing online, if you're seeing anything at all as it pertains to pastors and the church, is that there's also that same year-ish delay. In other words, right about now and for the last several months, we've been seeing what is also known as a great resignation among pastors in the church. Now, we always see them sort of, pastors in churches always, there's always sort of a steady rate of churches that are closing their doors and pastors that are stepping down, but it is accelerated in the last year. And even now, we continue to see a trend of pastors stepping down. And so there's a couple of things I wanted to say about that. The first is to affirm and assure you as a church, I'm not stepping down in an era of bitterness, frustration. It just happens to line up with the delayed effect of all the resignation stuff. What you're not going to find me doing is starting a blog and deconstructing my faith and, really pushing that the mega church method and the communication and the way church is done in America. Here's why you're not going to find me doing that. Because for the last 13 to 15 years, I have been deconstructing my faith. Anchor Church was planted out of a young man who grew up in church and thought, there's got to be a better way to do this, deconstructed it maybe 15 to 20 years ago, and then set out with a group of people to build a community of faith that would reflect better values, maybe better relationships, and a healthier culture within it. So Anchor Church isn't just the result of some consumeristic, individualistic church model in America, and so I'm not going to rally the troops to attack it. I believe for all of her, failures and room for growth, Anchor Church reflects and what we experience when we feel like it's healthier, when we feel like it really is something different here, is the result of me having kind of done some of that deconstructing 10 to 15 to 20 years ago. I hope that's helpful. So you're going to see some overlap in terms of that, and you might even be tempted to think like, wow, all these pastors are having a hard time, and Kris is stepping down, and it must have been that, maybe there's something going on with Kris, maybe there's something going on with the church, maybe something happened. There really is nothing like that. That's the one thing I would say about that is basically you're not going to see that happening with me, and you shouldn't sort of give in to some of that thought that maybe there's something wrong or something going on like that. Well, the other reason that I want us to consider that big delay, I guess we could say, the year-ish delay on the great resignation, even among pastors, is this: we would be fortunate to find a pastor. We would be fortunate to have someone who would be willing to stand here and to teach us the Bible, the Word of God, on a regular basis. Now, not everyone was able to go through the search team process, and not all of you can see my email inbox, but I must have emailed maybe 20 or more leaders in Acts 29, some regional leaders, a couple of vice presidents in Acts 29, in our church network, and then quite a number of other pastors as well. This was early on in the search process, and actually sent that out to all of them and said, hey, do you guys know anyone that might be interested, anyone that might be a good fit? Someone that's faithfully serving, not necessarily someone who's never been a pastor and really wants to get a job, but maybe someone who's been faithfully serving who can take us, into maybe the next season for Anchor Church and lead us and help us to continue to be healthy, even healthier, and to grow. And we really didn't get that much back. And the few that we had gotten back either didn't respond to us or were already serving somewhere and didn't feel like they could leave. So what I guess I'm saying is, not being on the search team, it might stand out to you like, man, can we find people, and how does that work? And we just sort of wish this and wish that, or wonder this, wonder that. And I guess what I'm saying is, because of the great resignation, and because of how difficult it really is to pastor, you should read the book, we would be fortunate to have someone who would give their lives, or some portion of it, to preach the gospel to us, to share God's word with us, and to be faithful in doing that. And so I want to encourage us with that perspective. Number one, the great resignation is here. That means, that Pastor Kris must be burned out and angry and frustrated, and he's going to start a blog that attacks the church. No, that's not happening. Okay, so we can get rid of that. And then number two, I think the other thing we need to embrace is, I'm repeating it for our sake, we're fortunate. I believe in the providence of God, so fortunate is just a way of speaking. But we're fortunate to have anyone who would be interested. Now, having said that, I want you to know that as a group of search team members and elders, I'm going to get into the update now for you. We actually received a good bit of input, good number of questions. I would say maybe not as many as some thought we would get. So we probably received somewhere in the range of about 10 responses from the church in terms of the last couple of weeks. We had a candidate come and speak for us, and in the midst of that, I think what I think feels interesting to us is that we had him come and speak on a Sunday, but for, I would say, the large part, most of us, that was our only encounter with him, and then what we saw after the service. And so I think there's a limited exposure for us as the church. But I want you to know this, that him coming and speaking was actually at the tail end of an initial weekend where he came and was interviewed. The staff met with him, our elders met with him. We actually had a hangout with the search team, so we got to have dinner at my place with him and his wife and the whole search team, followed by quite a number of communication points with him and his and the search team. And then that weekend when he came to speak for us, he had also gotten some additional time with staff and gotten some additional time with some of our leaders in the church. And we had a few opportunities for us to engage with him. So the preaching part may have been the only part in that lobby time, after the service that you had seen, but that was in the context of a larger get to know him by our search team. And so we were able to do that. Then we opened the floor up for a couple of weeks to give you guys a chance to give us some input, some thoughts, and even some consideration. And that was through Wednesday. And so then the search team met on Thursday. So Thursday, we had a meeting at 7 p.m., and it ran until 11 p.m. And now some of you who wished you were on the search team are glad that you weren't. We met until 11, and we had such a great conversation, so many things to discuss, but we also had a couple of really rich times in prayer, and even just a few pauses along the way that week and that day just to say, hey guys, any gut check, any sense, is the Spirit saying anything to anyone? There's multiple opportunities for us to say, let's change course, let's figure something out, or something isn't right, or I have one more question, or we have one more thing. So there's plenty of opportunities to do that. But by the end of that time, the search team had unanimously voted and decided to recommend our candidate, Josh Hurst, as our candidate to the elders, for the elders to then consider making him an offer. And so that's what the elders did. I kind of told you guys this a couple of weeks ago, that it was likely that we would take whatever recommendation the search team gives, yay or nay, and we would follow their input. So the elders really were leaning on them. So I say that to say that they made the recommendation. It was unanimous to the elders. The elders then discussed, and it was unanimous among the elders. And so we made an offer to him Friday, and then he accepted it Saturday. That would have been yesterday. So that's a huge milestone in this process for us as a church. I wanted to update you. I think it's... I do have a message today. So some of you are like, are we ever going to get into the Word of God? And so there's some really great churches that are going to do that all around town. I encourage you to visit them over the course. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I want you to be here, okay? I want you to stay. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Don't let me forget. Someone yell it if by the end of my message I've forgotten to share a picture of the men's group that met yesterday. Someone yell that. I'm going to count on one of you guys to do that over there. I know. What? So I just don't want to forget that. But anyway, what I guess I'm saying is we extended the offer. He needed time to pray about it. He said, hey, let me talk to my wife and the Lord, and I'll get back to you. And he's going to be communicating to his church today, the news. And so I kind of wanted to stay in sync with him, like, hey, what are you communicating over there? I don't want to communicate, hey, we've extended an offer, he's accepted, and his church wouldn't find out for a week, and then so maybe news would travel, something like that. So I don't know. So we just wanted to be careful of all that, but he's given us the clearance to be able to share that. And so I'll give you a couple of next steps if you want to know those. This isn't a members meeting, but you know what? I would have to communicate it anyway. So let me just share it with you. So it looks like a tentative start date would be something like November 1st. And so he'll have to sell a house and work through the transition for the church over there, same as we've done here a little bit. So they'll be up here likely sometime around November 1st would be a start date. That's tentative, depending on a few factors. And then I would stay on. The elders and search team are recommending and encouraging me to stay on, and I would like to. So stay on through at least the end of November and really do a proper handoff. Introduce him to people, tell him who to look out for, tell him who... What? No. But introduce him to people. There's a number of pastors that I want to introduce him to locally. There's the Acts 29 guys in Richmond and Charlottesville and the region that I've of relationships that I've developed. And so there's a number of things that I'll want to do in terms of a handoff to do that well. Then through the month of December, I'll be available. In other words, I'll be around still, and I'll be available basically, on call, if you will, to be able to assist and facilitate and work through a few things. But sort of that'll be the real decline in terms of my interaction. Like here, I'll be transitioning, ramping up to doing a little bit more work in November, double time. It always takes a little more work to show someone what you've done and how you do it, and there's all that explanation. But then I think December is when things will taper off. And then Joanne and I hope to get, we really didn't get a sabbatical all this time. We've never really gotten a full sort of 3-month sabbatical. So we hope to actually get from January through about March or so, maybe Easter, to get an actual sabbatical and get some rest. And so that's our prayer and hope, and that is a tentative timeline. And so if you're wondering like, well, what's going to happen and when's it going to happen? We will communicate. I've been doing my best, and even if I've dropped the ball or we've maybe missed an opportunity to communicate, we're doing the best we can. But I would say I'm committed to that. So, and I think our search team and elders are committed to that. So if you have questions or still need some information or want to understand the process better, you're welcome to reach out to the search team. There's an email search at anchorchurchonline.org, and you can reach out to them or just find them in the lobby or wherever and just have a chat with them. Would love to invite you in to do that. So now, there's one other thing I might say, and that is that a few of you did have maybe some questions, and some of you may still have some lingering questions that you didn't send in because maybe you'd forgotten about the timeline for submitting input and questions. There's no real deadline on that. We're a community. We're a family. We can talk about it. So if there's still something that lingers, we want you to know about it. And anyone who did submit a response should have by now, you might check your email inbox, but should have by now received a response and an opportunity to get together. We have not overlooked the things that anyone has shared with us or anyone has said in consideration. So we want to sort of do this together. Now, because of that, I guess what I want you to know too is that this really begins the actual transition phase. So for the next month and a half or so, I would like to do a study in the Bible from 2 Timothy. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but 2 Timothy is the book that Paul writes to Timothy as his last and final letter before he dies. Really, before he's before he goes to his death. So he knows that he's in court. He knows that he's going to be judged. And church history, says that Nero actually, put him to death. And so from what we understand, this is his last book, and it's written to Timothy. And it's a way of him not only saying goodbye, it's a way of him saying, Timothy, come see me. I have some things I want to pass on to you. And I want to make sure that as I pass these on to you, that you will pass them on to other people. And that is kind of how I feel. I would never even think to compare myself to Paul, but I do feel a bit like Timothy. I've received the gospel and the grace of God, and I want to be able to pass it on to you. So I feel more like a Timothy than a Paul. But as I think about all that Paul is writing in this book, I think over the next 6 weeks or so, we'll actually be studying this book together. And I think it'll be good for us as a church. So I want you to do a couple of things. I want you to read this book, and I want you to read this book. This is the book that will transition us well. And then there's one other thing too that I think would carry us through. It's not just that book and the Bible, particularly 2 Timothy. So I want you to write that down. I'm going to read 2 Timothy this month. It's only 4 chapters, so you can do one a week. If you can read 1 chapter a week, you can get through the month and read 2 Timothy. And I encourage you to do that. Be a part of this church and read with us. The other thing I would say too, in that same vein of be a part of the church, is in order to get through this transition and to experience some of the turbulence of a switch in leadership or a switch in leader, I would encourage you to actually get engaged with the church as a family. So this would be an opportunity for some to check out. For some to be, dismiss any engagement, to just sort of figure what might be next, what might be out there. And so I'm encouraging you, and I would encourage you to encourage those that instead of maybe checking out, zoning out, disengaging, moving on, that this may be a season where we need to intensely connect with each other and stay in tune with each other to care for each other through that. So what I would say, I think, is that if we get through the transition and you feel disconnected and discontent and unsure, it obviously may have something to do with the transition of Kris, stepping down and someone else stepping in. It may also have something to do with, not being as engaged with the community of faith through that process. So now I'm not saying that if you do that, everything will go well for you and you won't have any disappointment at all. I'm just saying that it helps to be engaged. It really does. So let me show you that picture. We have a picture of the men who met yesterday. You guys see that? There's Reggie. Reggie's great at selfies. Where is Reggie? He's at work. He'd be mad at me if I said that. He's not. He is not selfie oriented, but it is funny though. He took the picture. There's just a number of great guys. I look at that picture, and any one of those guys would be incredible to get some lunch with. Any one of those guys. So I'd say take out your phone, take a picture of that picture, find out who those guys are, and meet with them. Those are great guys. But that's what I missed. I wasn't there. That's what you might have missed if you weren't there. What you likely missed at something like this was real encouragement from other brothers. And you might have, because there's so much freedom at Anchor Church, we haven't been restrictive, like you better not be talking about this in your small groups, and you better not be talking about this negatively in your men's groups, and you better not be talking about this with women, and all of this kind of stuff. We're not restricting any of that. what we're saying is talk, engage, bring it up, sort it out together, pray through it together. There's real freedom here and openness even. And I think what you would have experienced at a time like that is likely some real encouragement and an opportunity to say, guys, I am just really uncomfortable with everything, and I feel like it's a lot of change, and I just don't understand it. And one of these guys would have said, hey, but think about this. And you know what? Let's meet later this week. Let's talk some more. I'm here for you. There's another way. We can take the picture down now since I've done guilt tripping everyone for not going to that. That really is not my intention. The intention was to inspire you that if you're thinking and feeling, hey, get engaged with that. And don't be shy. Be open. It takes some courage to be transparent or even vulnerable and say, I'm not happy with the changes. You can say, I just said it. You can say it. It's okay. But what we can do is work together as a family and sort through this together. There's one other context that I would say would be perfect for this. And that would be small groups or community groups. We've called them community groups. And our community groups are launching. So it's timely that in addition to extending an invitation to serve in children's ministry, I would also be extending an invitation to come to a community group and be a part of a small group. That is likely where you would find more encouragement than even by attending on a Sunday morning. Where you could be in the context of a few other men and women and not only praying for each other and caring for each other, but listening and talking and even praying for the church as a whole. There's a number of things that happen in a community group that I think would be, would enrich your spiritual journey and would encourage you and even build you up. So I would say, hey, get engaged. This is not the season to take a step back and say, well, I'm going to let the search team figure that out. I'm going to let Chris bear the majority of the weight, and I'm going to let the staff really figure out how to keep this church running while the rest of us disengage. I wouldn't say that. Don't do that. Engage. One of the best gifts we could give to the new pastor and to ourselves as a church, particularly to our staff who do bear the weight, and our ministry team leaders who bear the weight of teams that need volunteers, is to make sure that the church is fully staffed with volunteers and fully resourced with giving. Just keep it up. I have no reason to say that. In other words, there's no self-serving interest here to say, serve and give and be present. Be present. That to me is a huge, huge value of mine. When I first started church planting, do you know I had a couple of things that were like idealistic in view? And if you know me well, then you know that I do not like idealism, only because that is the nature of most of the criticism that has come my way, is from someone who's being a little too idealistic about the church, thinking it should be doing this, thinking it should be doing it that way, thinking that they like it the way their celebrity pastor does it, or their well-known church and their network does it, or whatever. So that idealism can be such a heavy weight when you use it to evaluate or critique. It's great as an ideal, but it's terrible as a point of evaluation. But nonetheless, I had some of that going into it. You want to know what one of them was? It was that we're a church plant, and we don't want anybody to come to Anchor Church that's just going to sit in the pews. You have to get active. You have to serve. And I would even say that, if you're just looking for a church where you could sit in the pews, there's a lot of churches out there, just like I joked earlier, except I was a little more serious. There's a lot of churches out there. Go sit on a pew anywhere you want to. But here at Anchor, we're church planting. We're building something, and we need everyone engaged. And we have had everyone engaged. We've had over 90% engagement in terms of our members, giving and serving and attending. So we've had that, and it continues to be really fruitful in that way. But nonetheless, that was a bit of idealism. And do you know what's changed over the last 10 years, 12 years, 15? The timeline's different because we've put so much time building it. But I have come to really appreciate people who do just show up. Maybe they're faithful to give and faithful to serve once a month or once every couple of months, but for the most part, they just show up and they're there. That is huge. And I think it's not just it's the idea of presence has become something that I really value. There's a real faithfulness there. You're present, you're there. If nothing else, you're there. And do you know, there's a couple of things I've learned too over my time in pastoral ministry, and that is that when I go to a hospital to sit with someone, that's actually usually all I have to offer. And I think it'd be easy to downplay or to underestimate the fact that you just showing up makes a world of difference for somebody. It's a big deal. And so if I don't have a Bible verse to share or some wisdom to share or some massive thing to communicate that's going to turn the light bulbs on and change everything for you, I may not always be able to do that. I've discovered I can't. And I've discovered the value of presence. And then I would take it even further and say, at the end of the day, when it comes to our relationship with God, do you know what he wishes we would love and crave the most? Do you think it's all of his gifts and blessings? I think he loves when we appreciate those things. But do you know what I think he desires from us that we would just long for? His presence. And so God, I don't think he's asking this because of an identity crisis, asking, am I enough? But I think he might be saying to us at times, and I've learned, hey, Kris, am I enough? I mean, if I let everything go this way in your life, or I let it go this way, am I still enough? And I think we're all asking that same question. Am I enough? Because we don't feel like we are. And that's where we're different than God. God knows he is, but he's really moving us to see the value of presence. So I encourage you, church, be present, be actively engaged, be faithful. Now, all of that was a setup for the message today. Be faithful, be faithful, be faithful.